Have you ever carried a secret so heavy that it felt like it was crushing your ribs? Now, imagine whispering that secret into the darkness, thinking you were completely alone, only to realize that the one person who could destroy you was listening to every single word. In 1884, a woman named Clara walked into a ruined chapel to beg for forgiveness for a crime she hadn't yet committed. She didn't know that the dead Duke she was betraying was standing 3 feet away, alive, watching, and waiting to strike. This is a story of lies, blackmail, and a romance born in the shadow of a guillotine. This is the story of the hidden Duke. Let's begin. The rain over the moors of Yorkshire didn't wash things clean. It simply drowned them. It was a torrential downpour, the kind that turned the dirt roads into churning rivers of mud and made the ancient stone walls of Blackwood Manor look like the teeth of a rotting skull. Clara Whitmore pulled her thin, grey shawl tighter around her shoulders, but the damp had already seeped through to her bones. She wasn't shivering from the cold, however. She was shivering from the weight of the letter tucked into her corset, right against her beating heart. Clara was nobody, a 22-year-old seamstress with calloused fingers and eyes the colour of bruised violets. She was the kind of woman the aristocracy looked through, not at. But tonight, she held the fate of one of England's most powerful dynasties in her pocket. She pushed open the heavy oak door of the abandoned chapel on the edge of the estate. The hinges screamed in protest, a sound that was swallowed by a crack of thunder. Inside, it was pitch black, smelling of old incense and wet stone. Clara collapsed onto the nearest pew, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She thought she was alone. She needed to be alone. "I can't do it," she whispered, her voice cracking. "God, please don't make me do it." 10 feet away, deep in the shadows of the confessional booth, a man froze. Arthur Vance, or at least, that was the name he was currently using, held his breath. He was a large man, broad-shouldered and scarred, wearing the rough tweed of a gamekeeper. He had been using the chapel to meet with his only loyal contact, a solicitor from London, named Mr. Thaddeus Pym. But Pym was late, and this girl had walked in instead. Arthur knew her. She was the new seamstress, quiet, diligent. He had watched her hem the curtains in the east wing yesterday. He had admired the curve of her neck, a dangerous distraction for a man in his position. Why is she crying? Arthur wondered, his hand instinctively drifting to the knife concealed in his boot. Clara pulled the letter from her dress. The paper crinkled loudly in the silence. She looked up at the shattered stained-glass window, where a flash of lightning illuminated the face of a stone angel. "I'm sorry," Clara sobbed, speaking to the empty air. "I'm so sorry, Your Grace. You aren't even here to defend yourself. And I'm about to bury you." Arthur's eyes narrowed. "Your Grace?" "They have Thomas," she confessed, her voice trembling with a mixture of terror and grief. "Lord Archibald said, if I don't plant this letter in the Duke's private study tonight, if I don't provide the proof that the Duke committed treason, he will hang my brother by morning." Arthur felt the blood turn to ice in his veins. The world believed Julian Thorn, the Duke of Ashford, was travelling in the Orient. In reality, Julian Thorn was standing in the shadows of his own chapel, wearing the clothes of a servant, hiding under the name Arthur Vance. He had faked his departure to root out the traitor stealing from the estate. He had suspected his uncle, Lord Archibald Thorn, for months, but he never expected Archibald to use a weapon as innocent as this trembling seamstress. "I have to destroy a good man to save my brother," Clara whispered, clutching the forged letter. "Forgive me, Duke Julian. I am the knife in your back." She wept, her forehead pressing against the wooden pew. Arthur watched her, a storm of conflicting emotions raging behind his stoic mask. Logic dictated he should step out, arrest her, and use her testimony to hang his uncle. She was, by her own admission, about to plant treasonous evidence against him. She was the enemy. But as he watched her shoulders shake, he didn't see an enemy. He saw a victim, and worse, he felt a strange, protective fury rising in his chest, not for his reputation, but for her. He stepped out of the shadows. Clara gasped, spinning around. She shoved the letter behind her back, her eyes wide with terror. "Who's there? I was just praying." Arthur stepped into the pale grey light filtering through the windows. He looked menacing. 6'2", unshaven, with a jawline that looked like it was carved from granite. "That was a loud prayer, Miss Whitmore," Arthur said, his voice low and rough, like gravel grinding together. Clara backed away until her legs hit the pew. "Mr. Vance, you're the gamekeeper." "I am," Arthur lied. He took a slow step toward her. "And you are the seamstress who is about to commit treason." Clara's face went white. "You heard. Every word." She looked at the door, gauging if she could run. "Don't," Arthur warned. "I can outrun a horse in this mud. You won't make it to the gate." Clara slumped, the fight draining out of her. "Then turn me in. Take me to the constable. But please, send someone to the darker alleys of Cheapside. Find a boy named Thomas. Tell him I tried." She held out her hands, wrists together, expecting him to bind them. Arthur looked at her delicate wrists, then up at her tear-streaked face. This woman possessed a dangerous kind of courage. She was willing to hang for her brother. He made a decision that would change the course of the Empire. "I'm not going to turn you in, Clara," Arthur said. You aren't?" "No." Arthur closed the distance between them. He reached out, his large, rough hand hovering over hers. "Give me the letter." "I can't," she whispered. "Archibald is watching. If I don't put it in the study." "If you put it in the study, the Duke returns to a hangman's noose," Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave. "And if you don't, your brother dies." "There is no third choice," she cried. "There is," Arthur said, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "You give the letter to me, and we burn it." "But Thomas—" "I will get Thomas back," Arthur vowed. It was a promise from a duke, spoken with the grit of a soldier. "But you have to trust me. You have to trust the gamekeeper." Clara searched his face. It was a hard face, weathered and stern, but his eyes were a piercing, intelligent blue that seemed out of place for a man who spent his days checking rabbit traps. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you help me?" Arthur took the letter from her unresisting fingers. He struck a match against the stone wall. The flame flared, illuminating their faces, the terrified beauty and the hidden king. "Because," Arthur said, as he touched the flame to the corner of the forged treason, "I don't like bullies, and I have a particular loyalty to the Duke." He dropped the burning paper onto the stone floor and watched his own death warrant turn to ash. "Now," Arthur said, stomping out the embers. "Dry your eyes, Miss Whitmore. We have a war to start." The walk back to the manor was silent, save for the squelch of mud and the howling wind. Arthur walked beside Clara, shielding her from the worst of the gale with his broad body, though he didn't touch her. His mind was racing. Lord Archibald wasn't just stealing funds anymore. He was manufacturing evidence of treason. The forged letter likely contained details about selling naval secrets to the French, a charge that would see Julian stripped of his title and executed without a trial. Archibald wanted the dukedom, and he was tired of waiting. Arthur needed to get into the manor. He needed to access his own safe. The one in the library behind the portrait of his grandfather, where he kept the real evidence he had been gathering against Archibald. But he couldn't just waltz in. He was Arthur Vance, a man not permitted above the servants' quarters. "When we get inside," Arthur said, leaning close to her ear so she could hear him over the wind, "you must act as though nothing happened. Can you do that?" Clara nodded, though her teeth were chattering. "But what about Thomas?" "Archibald expects a signal tonight. A candle in the library window to show the deed is done." Arthur swore under his breath. "If he doesn't see the candle?" "He kills him." "Then we light the candle," Arthur said grimly. "We make him think he's won." They entered the manor through the scullery entrance. The kitchen was empty, the staff asleep, or busy in the upper halls preparing for the masquerade ball Archibald was hosting the following evening, a ball to celebrate the Duke's imminent return, a twisted joke given he planned to have the Duke arrested upon arrival. "Go to your room," Arthur commanded softly. "Change out of these wet clothes." "I can't sit still," Clara argued, grabbing his sleeve. The contact sent a jolt through Arthur. Her hands were freezing. "You said you'd save Thomas. How? You're one man against a lord." Arthur looked down at her hand on his arm. "If only you knew," he thought. "I have friends in low places," Arthur lied. "But I need you to tell me exactly where Thomas is being held." "The White Horse Tavern, in the cellar. Archibald's man, a brute named Silas, no, not Silas, a man named Corbett, is guarding him." "Corbett," Arthur repeated. He knew Corbett, a former boxer with a glass jaw and a love for gin. "I know him." "Mr. Vance," Clara whispered. "Please be careful." Arthur looked at her. For weeks he had lived in isolation, trusting no one. Now, this fragile woman looked at him with such desperate hope that he felt 10 feet tall. "Go, meet me in the library in 1 hour to light that candle. I'll handle the rest." Clara fled up the servants' stairs. Arthur watched her go, then immediately turned and headed for the stables. He didn't go to a horse. He went to a loose floorboard under a pile of hay. He pulled out a heavy wooden box. Inside were 2 items, a heavy Webley revolver and a signet ring bearing the crest of Ashford. He pocketed the gun. The ring he stared at for a moment. "Soon," he whispered to the ring. But not tonight. 1 hour later, the library was shrouded in darkness. The massive room smelled of leather books and cigar smoke. Clara crept in, wearing a dry woolen dress. She held a single taper candle. Her hands were shaking so badly the flame danced, casting wild shadows on the walls. "Steady," a voice came from the darkness. Clara jumped, nearly dropping the candle. Arthur stepped out from behind a velvet curtain. He had changed into a dry shirt, his sleeves rolled up to reveal powerful forearms. "Did you find him?" Clara asked breathlessly. "I sent a telegram to a business associate in London," Arthur said. In reality, he had wired the head of the London Bow Street runners, a man who owed the Duke a life debt. "Thomas will be secured within the hour. Corbett is likely already unconscious." Clara let out a sob of relief, her knees buckling. Arthur caught her. For a moment, they were frozen. His hands gripped her waist to steady her. Her hands rested on his chest. He could feel her heart hammering against his ribs. She looked up at him, and the class divide between a seamstress and a gamekeeper vanished. "You saved his life," she whispered. "He's not safe yet," Arthur reminded her, his voice gruff. He gently set her upright and stepped back. He couldn't afford this. He couldn't afford to care. "Light the candle in the window. Signal Archibald." Clara moved to the tall French windows. She placed the candle on the sill. Outside, in the gardens, a shadow detached itself from a tree and waved a handkerchief. "He saw it," Clara said, terror returning to her voice. He thinks the letter is hidden in the desk. He thinks he has the proof to kill the Duke. Good, Arthur said. Let him feel safe. Suddenly, the library doors rattled. Voices were approaching from the hallway. Lord Archibald is coming, Clara hissed. He's bringing guests. Hide, Arthur commanded. Where? Behind the curtain. Now! Clara scrambled behind the heavy velvet drapes. Arthur looked around. He couldn't be seen here. A gamekeeper in the master's library at midnight? It was a firing offence. But before he could move, the doors burst open. Light flooded the room. Lord Archibald Thorne strode in, laughing, followed by 3 other men, wealthy investors from the railway company. Archibald was a rotund man with a face flushed from too much port wine and eyes that glittered with greed. And this, Archibald announced, sweeping his arm around the room, will soon be my private office, once my nephew's unfortunate legal troubles come to light. Arthur was trapped. He stood in the shadows near the fireplace, perfectly still. Archibald's eyes scanned the room and landed on him. The laughter stopped. You there, Archibald barked. Who is that? Arthur stepped into the light, keeping his head lowered slightly, adopting the posture of a servant. Vance, my lord. The gamekeeper. Vance? Archibald sneered. What the devil are you doing in the library? Checking the windows, my lord, Arthur said smoothly, his accent shifting to a rougher, country burr. Storm blew a latch loose. Didn't want the rain ruining the books. Archibald narrowed his eyes. He walked up to Arthur, smelling of brandy and arrogance. He was half Arthur's size, but he held the power of life and death. Or so he thought. You're the new man, Archibald muttered, poking a finger into Arthur's chest. You're a big brute, aren't you? Yes, my lord. You were in the army. Cavalry, my lord. Archibald smirked. Good. I have a job for a man who knows how to follow orders. I need someone to stand guard at the masquerade ball tomorrow. Keep the riffraff out. And perhaps handle a small disposal problem for me. Arthur's jaw tightened. Disposal problem. He meant Clara. Once the Duke was framed, Archibald intended to tie up the loose ends. I am at your service, my lord, Arthur said, forcing the words through his teeth. Good man. Archibald turned back to his guests. Get out, Vance. You smell of the stables. Arthur bowed. As he turned to leave, he glanced imperceptibly at the curtain where Clara was hiding. He walked out of the room, his heart pounding. The game had escalated. Archibald had just hired the Duke to guard his own murder plot. But the real danger wasn't Archibald. It was the secret Clara had almost spilled. As Arthur walked down the dark corridor, he realized that to save the Empire, he would have to use Clara as bait. And the thought made him sick. He needed a plan for the masquerade. He needed to turn the hunters into the hunted. The great hall of Blackwood Manor had been transformed into a shimmering, golden cage. It was the night of the masquerade ball, an event Lord Archibald Thorne had spared no expense in creating. 500 beeswax candles flickered in the crystal chandeliers, casting a warm, deceptive glow over the gathered aristocracy of Yorkshire. Violins wept a waltz from the gallery, drowning out the thunder that still rumbled in the distance, a remnant of the storm that had brought Clara and Arthur together the night before. Clara Whitmore adjusted the lace on her serving apron. She had been pulled from her sewing duties and ordered to serve champagne. It was a punishment, she knew. Archibald wanted her close. He wanted to watch her sweat. She moved through the crowd like a ghost, clutching a silver tray. The guests were a sea of silk, velvet, and jewels, their faces hidden behind elaborate masks of feathers and porcelain. To Clara, they looked like monsters. A hawk, a fox, a devil. They laughed and drank, oblivious to the fact that their host was planning to destroy his own nephew before the night was out. "Champagne, my lord," Clara whispered, offering a glass to a man in a bear mask. He took it without looking at her, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. To them, she was furniture. But one set of eyes was watching her. Arthur Vance stood by the main double doors, dressed not in his gamekeeper's tweed, but in the stiff, uncomfortable livery of a house footman. It was a demotion that Archibald had insisted upon, another power play to humiliate the big brute he had found in the library. Arthur stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid. The high collar of the uniform itched, but the Webley revolver tucked into the waistband of his trousers beneath his coat offered a cold, heavy comfort. From his vantage point, Arthur surveyed his kingdom. This was his house. These were his wines being drunk, his silver being used. And there, holding court near the fireplace, was his uncle. Lord Archibald was wearing a mask of gold leaf, shaped like a lion. He was laughing loudly, flanked by two men Arthur recognized immediately: Sir Frederick Ponsonby, the chief magistrate of the county, and Mr. Graves, a solicitor known for his lack of scruples. Arthur's jaw tightened. Sir Frederick. That confirmed it. Archibald wasn't just planning to ruin Julian's reputation, he was planning an immediate arrest. The moment the clock struck midnight, the time the Duke was rumoured to be returning, Archibald would produce the forged letter from the study and hand the warrant to the magistrate. Arthur's eyes shifted back to Clara. She looked terrified. Her face was pale, her hands trembling slightly as she navigated the crowded floor. She was the linchpin. If she broke, if she confessed to Archibald that the letter wasn't in the desk, the night would end in blood. "Stay strong, Clara," Arthur murmured under his breath. Suddenly, a hand grabbed Clara's wrist. Arthur's body went taut. It was a young aristocrat, Lord Charles Vane, a man known for his gambling debts and heavy drinking. He was swaying, his mask, a grotesque jester's face, askew. "Well now," Vane slurred, pulling Clara so hard the champagne glasses rattled on her tray. "Look at those eyes. Violet, aren't they? Too pretty for a servant." "Please, my lord," Clara said, trying to pull away. "I have duties." "Your duty is to please the guests," Vane sneered. "And I'm very displeased. My glass is empty." He reached for the bottle on her tray, but his hand clumsy, he knocked the tray upward. Crash. Crystal shattered on the marble floor. Champagne soaked the hem of Vane's trousers. The music didn't stop, but the conversation in the immediate vicinity died instantly. "You clumsy little wretch!" Vane shouted, raising his hand to strike her. Clara flinched, closing her eyes, waiting for the blow. It never landed. A hand, large and rough, caught Vane's wrist in midair. Clara opened her eyes. Arthur was there. He hadn't run. He had simply appeared, moving with a speed that defied his size. "I believe," Arthur said, his voice low and vibrating with a dangerous calm, "that it was an accident, my lord." Vane tried to yank his arm back, but Arthur's grip was like an iron shackle. "Unhand me, you filthy servant. Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are, Lord Vane," Arthur said. "I also know you owe the house £4,000 in gambling debts. I suggest you don't add a salt to your tab." Vane froze. The specific number, £4,000, was a secret known only to the Duke's private ledger. How did a footman know it? For a second, Vane stared into Arthur's blue eyes. He saw something there that cut through the alcohol haze. Authority. Absolute, terrifying authority. Arthur released him. "Step away." Vane stumbled back, rubbing his wrist, muttering curses, but he retreated into the crowd. Arthur turned to Clara. He didn't touch her, but he shielded her from the stares of the onlookers. "Are you hurt?" "No," she breathed, her heart hammering against her ribs. "But Arthur, you shouldn't have. Archibald is watching." "Let him watch," Arthur said. He knelt down and began picking up the larger shards of glass, a task far beneath a duke, but one he performed with deliberate slowness. "Listen to me carefully, Clara. The plan has changed." "Changed?" she whispered, pretending to help him clean up. "How?" "Archibald has the magistrate here. He's going to move the timeline up. He won't wait for midnight." Arthur's eyes locked onto hers. "In 10 minutes, he will take Sir Frederick to the library to find the letter." "But there is no letter," Clara hissed. "We burned it. When he opens that drawer and finds it empty, he'll know I betrayed him. He'll kill me, Arthur." "He won't find it empty," Arthur said enigmatically. Clara paused, a shard of glass in her hand. "What did you do?" "I put something else in the drawer. Something better." Arthur stood up, brushing off his knees. "Go to the kitchens. Stay there. Do not come out until I come for you." "Arthur, wait. Go!" He turned and marched away, back to his post. Clara watched him go, a knot of dread forming in her stomach. Who was this man? He spoke to lords like he was their superior. He knew the debts of the aristocracy, and he looked at her not with the hunger of men like Vane, but with a fierce, protective gravity. Across the room, Lord Archibald Thorne lowered his champagne glass. He had seen the altercation. He had seen his footman whisper to the seamstress. Archibald smiled. It was a cold, reptilian smile. He turned to Mr. Graves. "It seems our gamekeeper is fond of the girl." "Shall I have him removed?" Graves asked, his voice raspy. "No," Archibald said. "Love makes people predictable. If the girl proves difficult, we can use the brute to break her." He checked his pocket watch. "It is time. Gather Sir Frederick. Let us go to the library and uncover my nephew's treason." The library was quiet, a stark contrast to the cacophony of the ballroom. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn, shutting out the storm. The double doors swung open. Lord Archibald strode in, holding a candelabra high. Behind him came Sir Frederick Ponsonby, a tall, austere man with a white moustache, and Mr. Graves. 2 constables waited in the hallway. "I regret this deeply, Sir Frederick," Archibald lied, his voice dripping with false sorrow. "To think that the Duke of Ashford, my own flesh and blood, would sell secrets to the French. It breaks my heart." "We must follow the evidence, Lord Thorne," Sir Frederick said stiffly. "You said you had proof." "I do." Archibald walked to the massive mahogany desk. "I was looking for a ledger yesterday when I stumbled upon a letter. I left it exactly where it was, fearing to touch such poison." Archibald stood behind the desk. He looked at the specific drawer where he had ordered Clara to plant the forgery. He paused for effect, glancing at the magistrate. "Prepare yourself, Sir Frederick. What you are about to see will shake the peerage." Archibald yanked the drawer open. He reached in, his fingers expecting the smooth texture of the parchment Clara had used. Instead, his hand brushed against a thick, leather-bound notebook. Archibald frowned. He rummaged deeper. The drawer was otherwise empty. "Is there a problem, Lord Thorne?" Sir Frederick asked, stepping closer. It was here," Archibald stammered. He pulled the drawer out completely, dumping the contents onto the desk. Quills, ink, sealing wax, and the leather notebook. No letter. Archibald's face went from flushed to a pale, sickly grey. "The girl," he hissed. "My lord?" Graves stepped forward. "She didn't do it," Archibald whispered, his shock turning instantly to a murderous rage. "The little wretch didn't do it." "Lord Thorne," Sir Frederick said, his tone hardening, You brought me here to show me treason. Where is it? Archibald's mind raced. He was cornered. If he couldn't produce evidence against the Duke, he looked like a fool, or worse, a conspirator. He needed a scapegoat. Someone has removed it, Archibald shouted. A spy! There is a spy in this house! He pointed a shaking finger at the notebook on the desk. But look! What is this? He didn't know what the notebook was, but he hoped it was incriminating. He opened it at random. His eyes scanned the page. May 14th. £5,000 diverted from the tenant repair fund to private account A.T. June 2nd. £2,000 from the widow's pension fund. A.T. July 10th. Forged signatures on the railway contracts. A.T. Archibald stopped breathing. This wasn't the Duke's treason. It was a ledger. A detailed, handwritten ledger of every penny Archibald had stolen from the estate over the last 5 years. And on the bottom of the page, the ink still fresh, was a note, awaiting the magistrate's review. Archibald looked up, terror in his eyes. This wasn't an accident. This was a trap. What is that? Sir Frederick demanded, reaching for the book. Nothing. Archibald slammed the book shut. Personal accounts. Show me the book, Lord Thorn, Sir Frederick ordered. No. The doors to the library burst open. Clara was shoved into the room by the brute, Corbett. She stumbled, falling to her knees on the Persian rug. Found her trying to sneak out the kitchen entrance, my lord, Corbett grunted. Archibald looked at Clara. His fear evaporated, replaced by pure, unadulterated malice. She had done this. She had swapped the letter. You! Archibald snarled. He came around the desk, seizing a heavy brass letter opener. You stole it! You stole the evidence against the Duke! I don't know what you're talking about, Clara cried, though her eyes darted to the notebook. Sir Frederick! Archibald shouted, improvising wildly. This woman is the spy. She is the Duke's mistress. She destroyed the letter to protect him. Arrest her. I want to see that book, Archibald, Sir Frederick insisted, stepping around him. Arrest her, Archibald screamed, losing all control. Corbett, make her talk! Corbett raised a heavy fist. That's enough. The voice came from the shadows of the corner, near the grandfather clock. Every head turned. Arthur Vance stepped out. He was still wearing the footman's livery, but he had unbuttoned the coat. In his right hand, the Webley revolver was held loosely, the barrel pointed at the floor. But the threat was unmistakable. Vance? Archibald blinked. What are you doing? Get out! I said that's enough, Arthur repeated. He walked toward the center of the room. He moved differently now. The slouch was gone. The rough accent was gone. His stride was predatory, elegant. Drop the gun, gamekeeper, Corbett shouted, reaching for his own weapon. Arthur didn't even look at him. He raised the Webley and fired a single shot. Bang! The bullet smashed into a vase on the shelf right next to Corbett's head. Corbett yelped and ducked, dropping his weapon. Clara covered her ears, screaming. The next one goes between your eyes, Corbett, Arthur said calmly. Kick the gun over here. Corbett kicked the pistol across the rug. Vance, have you lost your mind? Archibald roared. Sir Frederick, this man is insane. He's holding us hostage. Arthur ignored his uncle. He walked over to Clara. Get up, Clara. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. Arthur. He offered her his hand. She took it, and he pulled her to her feet, tucking her behind him. Then Arthur turned to Sir Frederick. Sir Frederick, Arthur said, his voice perfectly modulated, the voice of an Oxford-educated aristocrat. I apologize for the theatrics, but my uncle can be rather deaf to reason. Sir Frederick squinted. He looked at the gamekeeper, the scar, the stubble, the rough clothes. Then he looked at the eyes, the stance. Good God, Sir Frederick whispered. The colour drained from his face. Your Grace? Archibald froze. He looked from the magistrate to the gamekeeper. What? What did you call him? Arthur reached up and wiped the smudge of dirt from his cheek. He looked at Archibald with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Hello, Uncle," Arthur said. "You really should have checked the staff roster more carefully." "No," Archibald whispered, stepping back until he hit the desk. "No, you're in the Orient. You're dead. I was very much alive in this room yesterday when you told Miss Whitmore to frame me," Arthur said. "And I was alive just now when you tried to hide your own ledger." Arthur nodded to the desk. "Read it, Sir Frederick. It contains 5 years of embezzlement. I've been compiling it for months." Sir Frederick snatched the book. As he read, his expression turned thunderous. "This is criminal," Sir Frederick stated. "Lord Archibald, you are under arrest." Archibald looked like a trapped rat. He looked at the window. He looked at Corbett, who was cowering. Then his eyes landed on Clara. "It's a lie!" Archibald shrieked. "He coerced her. He's sleeping with the help. It's a conspiracy." Suddenly, Archibald lunged, not at Arthur, but at the fireplace. He grabbed a heavy iron poker and swung it wildly at Clara, who was standing just behind Arthur. "If I go down, I take the witness." It happened in slow motion. Arthur spun, shielding Clara with his body. The iron poker slammed into Arthur's shoulder with a sickening crunch. Arthur grunted, dropping to one knee. The pain was blinding. "Arthur!" Clara screamed. Archibald raised the poker for a killing blow to Arthur's head. Click! Archibald froze. Arthur, despite the shattered collarbone, had raised the Webley. The barrel was pressed directly against Archibald's stomach. "Do it!" Arthur wheezed through gritted teeth. "Give me a reason." The room went deathly silent. Slowly, Archibald lowered the poker. The constables rushed forward, tackling him to the ground, shackling his hands. Arthur slumped forward, the adrenaline fading, the pain taking over. "Arthur!" Clara was on her knees beside him, her hands pressing against his shoulder. "You're hurt. You're bleeding." Arthur looked at her. His vision was swimming. "I'm fine," he lied. Sir Frederick stepped over the thrashing form of Archibald. He looked down at Arthur. "Your Grace," Sir Frederick said, bowing low. "I will send for the doctor immediately." Clara froze. Her hands were on Arthur's chest, stained with his blood. She looked at Sir Frederick, then back at Arthur. "Your Grace," she whispered. Arthur looked into her violet eyes. He saw the relief vanish, replaced by a dawning, horrified realization. "Clara," he rasped. "You—" She pulled her hands away as if burned. "You aren't Arthur Vance." "No," he admitted. "You're the Duke," she said, her voice trembling. "You're Julian Thorn." "Yes." She stood up, backing away from him. "You lied to me. The whole time. You let me believe I was conspiring with a servant. You let me be terrified for my brother, when you could have stopped this with a word." "I couldn't." Julian tried to stand, but the pain forced him back down. "I needed the proof. I needed him to incriminate himself." "You used me," Clara said, the betrayal cutting deeper than any knife. "I was just bait." "Clara, no! Don't touch me!" she cried. She turned and ran. She ran out of the library, past the stunned guests in the hallway, and out into the storm. "Clara!" Julian shouted. He tried to follow, but the room spun, and darkness claimed him. The storm that had battered Yorkshire for 2 days finally broke as Clara stumbled onto the cobblestones of the village high street. She was drenched, her woolen dress heavy with water and mud, her hair plastered to her skull. But the cold she felt had nothing to do with the weather. It was a hollowness in her chest, a void where trust used to be. She didn't stop at the boarding house where she lived. She ran straight for the White Horse Tavern. The common room was smoky and loud, filled with travellers waiting out the rain. Clara burst through the door, wild-eyed, ignoring the stares of the patrons. She pushed past a table of drunkards and headed for the cellar stairs. "Here now! You can't go down there!" the barkeep shouted. Clara didn't listen. She practically fell down the wooden steps into the damp darkness of the cellar. "Thomas!" she screamed, her voice raw. "Thomas!" The cellar was empty of prisoners. The chair where Thomas had been tied was overturned. The ropes lay on the floor, cut. Clara's knees gave out. She collapsed onto the dirt floor, a wail of despair building in her throat. He lied, she thought. The Duke lied about everything. He didn't save him. "Miss Whitmore?" A voice came from the shadows behind the wine racks. Clara spun around, terrified. A man stepped out. He wasn't one of Archibald's thugs. He was dressed in a sturdy brown coat and a bowler hat, holding a lantern. "Who are you?" Clara gasped, backing away. "Officer Hayes, Bow Street Runners," the man said, tipping his hat respectfully. "London Division." "Where is my brother?" "Safe, miss. He's in the back room upstairs, eating the first hot meal he's had in 3 days. Clara stared at him, her breath hitching. "He's safe?" "Aye. The gamekeeper, His Grace, wired us yesterday. Gave strict orders. Secure the boy, feed him, and wait for the sister." Hayes reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a heavy velvet pouch. "He also asks me to give you this." Clara took the pouch. It was heavy. She loosened the strings and gasped. Inside were 20 gold sovereigns. It was more money than she could earn in 10 years of sewing. There was a note tucked inside. Clara unfolded it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was bold and jagged, written in haste. "Clara, for a new start. Take Thomas far away from here. If you never want to see me again, I understand. But please, be safe." J. Clara stared at the gold. It glittered in the lantern light. It was a fortune. It was freedom. And it felt like a bribe. "He thinks he can buy me," she whispered, tears hot in her eyes. "He thinks he can play with my life, use me as bait to catch his uncle and then pay me off like a common servant." "Miss?" Officer Hayes asked gently. "I don't want his money," Clara said, her voice shaking with fury. She shoved the pouch back at the officer. "Miss, be reasonable," Hayes said. "Archibald is arrested, but his friends aren't. You can't stay in Yorkshire. You need this to travel." Clara looked at the stairs leading up to where her brother was eating. She thought of Thomas, innocent, young Thomas, who had almost died because of the Thorn family's power struggles. She had to get him out. She had to protect him. She snatched the pouch back, her knuckles white. "Fine," she hissed. "I will take it. But not as a gift, as payment for services rendered. We are leaving tonight." "Tonight? But the roads." "Tonight." 3 months passed. London was a different kind of beast than Yorkshire. Where the moors were open and wet, London was cramped, grey, and smelled of coal smoke and unwashed bodies. Clara and Thomas had rented a single room in a tenement in Spitalfields. It was a miserable place, with peeling wallpaper and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. But it was theirs, and it was anonymous. Thomas had found work as a delivery boy for a bakery. Clara, refusing to touch the rest of the gold sovereigns, had hidden the pouch under a loose floorboard. She wouldn't spend the Duke's money. She would survive on her own. She found work at Miller's Textiles, a garment factory near the docks. It was a hellhole. The air was thick with cotton dust that coated the lungs, and the noise of 50 sewing machines clattering at once was deafening. Clara sat at her station, stitching collars onto shirts for 12 hours a day. Her fingers were pricked and bleeding, her back ached constantly, and the foreman, a cruel man named Mr. Snyder, docked her pay for every minute she took to rest. "Faster, Whitmore!" Snyder barked, pacing the rows with a cane. "This isn't a tea party. We have an order for the Navy due by Friday." Clara kept her head down, the needle flashing. Stitch, pull, knot. Stitch, pull, knot. She was exhausted. She was thin. But she was free, or so she told herself. At night, when the city quieted, she couldn't stop the memories. She didn't dream of the Duke, the man in the velvet coat and the signet ring. She dreamed of Arthur. She dreamed of the rough gamekeeper who had held her hand in the dark chapel. She dreamed of the way he had stood in front of her at the masquerade, shielding her from Lord Vane. She missed a man who didn't exist. He was a lie, she whispered to the ceiling of her damp room. Just a character he played. But the way he had looked at her when he was bleeding on the library floor, that hadn't looked like acting. "Clara," Thomas whispered from his cot across the room. "You awake?" "Go back to sleep, Tom." "I saw a carriage today," Thomas said sleepily. "A fancy one, with a crest on the door. It was driving slow through the market." Clara's heart skipped a beat. "London is full of carriages, Tom." "Yeah. But the man inside, he was looking out the window like he was hunting for something." Clara turned over, pulling the thin blanket up to her chin. "Go to sleep." But she didn't sleep. She lay awake, listening to the rats in the walls, wondering if the past was finally catching up to her. Blackwood Manor was silent. The servants walked on eggshells. The masquerade decorations had been taken down months ago, but the house still felt empty. Lord Archibald Thorne was rotting in Newgate Prison, awaiting trial for embezzlement and attempted murder. The estate was secure, the finances were recovering, but the Duke of Ashford was a ghost in his own home. Julian sat in the library, the very room where he had almost died. His left arm was still stiff, the bone knitting slowly, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the silence. He stared at the spot on the rug where Clara had knelt beside him. He could still feel the ghost of her hands on his chest. "You used me." Her words haunted him. He had tried to justify it 1,000 times. He had to use her. Archibald was paranoid. He needed to believe the trap was working. If Julian had told Clara the truth, her acting might have faltered. Archibald might have seen through it. It was a tactical decision, a general sacrificing a pawn to win the war. But Julian wasn't a general. He was a man who had fallen in love with the pawn. "Your Grace!" Julian looked up. His valet, Barnaby, stood in the doorway, holding a silver tray with a stack of letters. "Burn them," Julian said, turning back to the fire. "Even the report from the private investigator, sir?" Julian spun around so fast he nearly knocked over his chair. "Give it to me." He snatched the letter from the tray. It was from Mr. Pym, the solicitor who had been coordinating the search in London. Julian had spent a small fortune hiring men to comb every boarding house, tavern and factory in the capital. He tore the envelope open. "Your Grace, we have located a woman matching the description. She is working at Miller's Textiles in Spitalfields under the name Clara Smith. She resides at 42 Brick Lane." Julian let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for 3 months. "Barnaby!" Julian commanded, his voice ringing with a vigor that had been absent for weeks. "Pack my trunk. We are going to London." "Very good, sir. Shall I prepare the townhouse in Mayfair?" "No," Julian said, his eyes hard. "I won't be staying in Mayfair, and bring the rough tweed suit, the one I wore as the gamekeeper." Barnaby raised an eyebrow but bowed. "As you wish." 2 days later, London was blanketed in a suffocating yellow fog. Miller's Textiles was a grim brick building that looked more like a prison than a workplace. Inside, the air was hot and humid. Mr. Snyder, the foreman, was shouting at a young girl who had dropped a spool of thread. "Clumsy cow! That's coming out of your wages!" The heavy iron doors at the front of the factory floor swung open with a clang that silenced the room. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was a man who looked like he had taken a wrong turn from a royal procession. He wore a long, black wool coat, a silk cravat, and held a silver-tipped cane. He was tall, imposing, and radiated an aura of power that made the air in the room feel suddenly thin. It was Julian. He hadn't worn the gamekeeper's clothes. He had realized on the train ride down that he couldn't hide who he was anymore. If he was going to win her back, he had to do it as himself. As the Duke. Snyder bustled forward, wiping his greasy hands on his apron. "Here now, who are you? You can't just waltz in here. This is private property." Julian looked at Snyder with the kind of cold indifference a lion might show a buzzing fly. "I am the Duke of Ashford," Julian announced. His voice carried to the back of the room, clear and commanding. A gasp went through the rows of seamstresses. Snyder paled. The Duke? My lord, I didn't know. To what do we owe the honor? Are you looking to buy the factory?" "I am looking," Julian said, scanning the rows of terrified women. "For Miss Whitmore." At the far end of the room, Clara froze. Her needle hovered over a collar. She didn't look up. She couldn't. He found me. "Whitmore?" Snyder looked confused. "We don't have a Whitmore." "Oh, you mean Smith? The girl in the back?" Julian's eyes locked onto the bent head at station 42. He recognized the curve of her shoulders. He walked down the center aisle. The machines fell silent as he passed. The women stared, open-mouthed. He stopped at her table. "Clara," he said softly. Clara took a deep breath. She set down her needle. She stood up and turned to face him. She looked tired. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her dress was patched, but her chin was high, and her violet eyes were blazing with defiance. "My name is Smith," she said coldly, "and I have work to do, Your Grace. Unless you have a shirt that needs mending." The disrespect was palpable. Snyder gasped. "You insolent girl! Apologize to His Grace immediately, or you're fired." "She is not fired," Julian said, not taking his eyes off Clara. "In fact, Mr. Snyder, you are going to leave us. Now. Take the rest of the staff for a break. Outside." "But the production schedule..." Julian turned his head slightly to look at Snyder. "Did I stutter?" Snyder swallowed. "Everyone out. Break time. Move!" The room cleared in seconds. The women hurried out, whispering excitedly, leaving Clara and Julian alone in the vast, silent factory. "Why are you here?" Clara asked, her voice hard. "Did you come to check on your investment? I still have the gold. I haven't spent it. You can have it back." "I don't want the gold, Clara." "Then what do you want? Do you need me to act in another play? Do you need me to trick another relative?" "I deserved that," Julian said. He took a step closer, removing his hat. "I came to tell you that I was wrong." Clara laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "The Duke of Ashford is never wrong. He is the law." "The Duke was a fool," Julian said. "I thought I could treat people like chess pieces. I thought the only thing that mattered was justice. Catching Archibald, saving the estate." "You did catch him," Clara said. "You won." "No," Julian shook his head. "I lost. I sat in that library for 3 months, surrounded by my books and my money, and I realized I was poorer than I was when I was pretending to be a gamekeeper, because when I was Arthur, I had you." Clara's expression faltered. She looked away. "Arthur wasn't real." "He was," Julian insisted. "The man who listened to your confession. That was me. The man who burned the evidence to save your brother. That was me. The man who wanted to kill Lord Vane for touching you. That was me." He dropped his cane. It clattered loudly on the floor. He didn't care. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. Not the signet ring of the Duke, a simple silver band he had bought from a jeweller in Cheapside that morning. "I can't undo what I did," Julian said, his voice raw. "I can't erase the lie. But I am asking for a chance to tell you the truth, every day, for the rest of my life." Clara stared at the ring. "You are a duke. I am a seamstress who works in a sweatshop. We are not... It's not possible." "I don't care about possible," Julian said. "I have enough money to buy this factory and burn it to the ground. I have enough power to change the laws. I don't care what society says. I only care what you say." He went down on one knee. In the dirt and dust of the factory floor, the Duke of Ashford knelt before the seamstress. "Clara Whitmore," he said, "I am not ordering you. I am not commanding you. I am begging you. Come home." Clara looked down at him. She saw the vulnerability in his eyes. She saw the regret. And she saw the love that she had seen that night in the rain, the love she thought had been a lie. "You're ruining your trousers," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'll buy new ones," he smiled, a crooked, hopeful smile. "Or you can mend them for me." Clara let out a watery laugh. She reached out and touched his face, her rough fingers tracing his jaw. "I'm not going to be a pawn, Julian," she warned. "Never again." "No," Julian swore, turning his face into her palm. "Never a pawn. The Queen. You'll be the Queen." The trial of Lord Archibald Thorne at the Old Bailey was the scandal of the decade. The gallery was packed, the air thick with the scent of lavender water and nervous sweat. Archibald, gaunt and desperate, played his final card. He pointed a trembling finger at the gallery where Clara sat. "He is bewitched," Archibald shrieked at the judge. "The Duke is marrying a common seamstress, a woman who conspired to hide evidence. He is unfit to hold the title." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. All eyes turned to Julian. By the rigid laws of Victorian society, Archibald was right. A duke marrying a factory girl was social suicide. Julian stood slowly. He didn't look at his uncle. He looked up at the gallery, locking eyes with Clara. He didn't see a seamstress. He saw the woman who had walked into a storm to save a brother she loved. "My uncle claims I am unfit because I chose a woman of no title," Julian addressed the court, his voice steady as stone. "But while he, a lord of the realm, was stealing from widows and plotting murder, this common woman was risking her life to stop him." He walked to the witness stand and placed his hand on the ledger, the very book Archibald had tried to hide. "If nobility is defined by blood, then perhaps I am unfit," Julian declared. "But if nobility is defined by honor, courage, and truth, then Clara Whitmore is the noblest person in this room, and I would sooner strip myself of every title I own than deny her hand." The gavel banged, silencing the stunned crowd. The verdict was swift, guilty on all counts. As Archibald was dragged away, screaming, Julian climbed the stairs to the gallery. He didn't care about the reporters scribbling furiously. He offered Clara his arm. "Ready to go home, Your Grace?" he asked. Clara smiled, the ghosts of the past finally exorcised. "Take me to the chapel, Julian. I think I have one more confession to make." "And what is that?" "That I love the gamekeeper just as much as the Duke." And that is the story of how a confession in the dark brought down a tyrant and built a love story that defied an empire. It turns out the most dangerous secrets aren't the ones we keep from the law, but the ones we keep from our own hearts. If you enjoyed this journey through the rain-soaked moors of Yorkshire and the gritty streets of London, please destroy that like button, just like Julian destroyed the evidence. If you were Clara, would you have forgiven Julian for lying about who he was, or would you have kept the gold and run? I want to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story of justice, romance, and revenge. Until next time, keep your secrets safe.